Hello, and welcome to Starry Storytime, a gentle, soothing space where evening stories and soft whispers guide you into a peaceful night's rest. Tonight, we're offering another relaxing tale designed to help ease your mind and lead you toward a comforting slumber. Before we begin, let's take a moment to prepare our bodies and minds for deep rest. Find a comfortable position, and with each slow inhale and soft exhale, let any worries from the day quietly slip away. It can be challenging to step away from the day's hustle, especially when it's time to sleep. Yet remember, the less we worry about falling asleep, the easier it becomes for our minds to let go of lingering tension. Allow the gentle rhythm of your breath to wash away any remaining concerns, and let tonight's story guide you into serenity. Now, settle in and let the soothing aura of Starry Storytime surround you. May you enjoy this story and drift into a tranquil, restorative night's sleep. Once upon a time, there was a merchant named Laurent who had placed all his wealth into a fleet of ships, only to see them lost to the vast ocean. As a widower, he didn't have to share this sorrowful news with a wife. However, he did have 6 children who were accustomed to a life of comfort and luxury. When creditors came calling and word spread about the family's newfound poverty, it weighed heavily on their hearts. Day after day passed without any sign of the ships, prompting Laurent to begin selling their treasured possessions, furniture, the family carriage, and even his daughter's exquisite jewelry and fine gowns. They were forced to leave their opulent home behind and relocate to a humble cottage on the edge of town. Laurent often ventured out in search of new investments and partners to help revive his business. Meanwhile, his 3 sons and 3 daughters, though mostly grown, found themselves struggling with the responsibilities of running a household. While the older siblings wrestled with their new circumstances, Camille, the youngest daughter, embraced her chores with enthusiasm, learning how to manage their home without any servants. Beloved by those in the village, Camille sought guidance from neighbors on baking bread, sewing clothes, tending to gardens, and caring for chickens. Her willingness to learn and her diligent work ethic endeared her to everyone around her. Gradually, she became the heart and soul of Laurent's family. As her older siblings faced the challenges of their situation, Camille ensured that their home remained tidy and that meals were always ready at the table. Nearly 2 years into this new way of life, news arrived that one of Laurent's lost ships had finally returned to port with most of its cargo still intact. The family rejoiced at this unexpected stroke of fortune, while her older siblings eagerly dreamed of leaving behind their simple life among the villagers. Camille found joy in their cozy cottage, with its tidy garden and the warm aroma of freshly baked bread wafting through the air. Though she was delighted by her family's happiness, she felt uncertain about returning to their former luxurious lifestyle. She had discovered a deep sense of fulfillment in being helpful and appreciated. To reclaim his property, Laurent set off on horseback toward the port, a journey that would span a couple of days. Once he arrived, he could oversee the distribution of his regained fortune and arrange for a comfortable carriage for his return. Excited about the prospects ahead, he asked each of his children what gift they would like from the city. The older siblings eagerly requested lavish items, silk shoes adorned with sparkling buckles, intricately decorated hats, sumptuous velvet capes, playful bears, and gleaming jewels. Only Camille remained quiet, lost in thought as she pondered her wish. When her father gently encouraged her to share her desire, she took a moment before responding. "Father, I have always dreamed of seeing a rose. They don't grow around here and are so rare and precious." She wished for just one rose in any color, as she found them enchanting. Laurent chuckled at his youngest child's unique request, but readily agreed. Secretly, he planned to surprise her with a necklace or another small treasure to accompany the flower. On the morning of his departure, the weather was delightful. Camille took great care in packing his saddlebag with supplies for the journey and bid him farewell with a bittersweet smile that glimmered with unshed tears. The older children were more indifferent, used to their father's absences and solely focused on the gifts they hoped to receive upon his return. As Laurent rode away along the sun-drenched forest path, Camille stood at the cottage door until he disappeared from view. A peculiar sense of unease washed over her, but she chose to keep it to herself. After all, their fortunes seemed to be turning for the better. While Laurent's children waited at home, he steadily made his way to the port city, filled with hope of recovering what he had lost. It was true that he had endured significant hardships. Yet with the cargo loaded onto the ship, he envisioned starting anew, perhaps even building a fleet of ships in time. His mind danced with dreams of spices, silks, and other treasures he could import in the future. Thus, it was truly disheartening when he arrived only to find his dreams dashed. Indeed, the ship had returned with most of its cargo safe and sound. Yet, word of his fortunate circumstance spread like wildfire, prompting his many creditors to spring into action. By the time Laurent arrived to reclaim his belongings, they had already been distributed to settle his numerous debts. Despite his attempts to negotiate extensions with various merchants regarding his hefty bills, he found no success. As the day came to a close, he stood debt-free yet empty-handed. There were no funds left for him to invest, nor any money to buy the gifts he had promised his family. Overwhelmed by disappointment, he felt no desire to remain in the city for another night. Without taking the time to prepare himself for the weather or send any messages ahead, Laurent climbed onto his weary horse and rode away from town, retracing the provincial road that had brought him to the port that very morning. A few hours later, as darkness enveloped the land, a storm swept in. Lightning flashed and thunder roared all around him, while fierce winds howled, snapping branches from trees. Startled by the chaos, Laurent's horse bolted off the main road and into an unfamiliar forest. Realizing too late that embarking on this nighttime journey was unwise, Laurent began searching through the swirling wind for any form of shelter, a cave, or anything that might offer protection. He lost track of time as his horse wandered through the tempest until finally a tall stone wall loomed before him. Spurring his horse onward, he hoped it led to a house where he could find refuge. But upon reaching the daunting wall of stone, he discovered it was not a home. It was the boundary of an estate. Before him stood a grand iron gate that was slightly ajar. With no time for politeness, Laurent dismounted and pushed against the heavy gate to swing it wider so he could lead his horse through. Together, they made their way up a paved path that faded into the swirling shadows ahead. Leaves danced wildly around him, and rain lashed at him from all directions as Laurent struggled to make out what lay before him in the ominous gloom. It was unmistakably a mansion. Though his sight was somewhat limited, he could discern a grand entrance and numerous spacious rooms adorned with tall windows. It was a rather daunting place to approach without an invitation, yet he felt he had no other option. The thought of spending the night exposed to the elements filled him with dread. He desperately needed shelter. After securing his horse in a sheltered nook, he made his way to the imposing front door and grasped the heavy iron knocker. As he let it fall, its sound reverberated through the stillness, echoing like distant thunder. When no one responded, he inhaled deeply and leaned against the door, pushing it open with all his strength. It creaked ajar, nearly sending him tumbling into the vast entryway. Laurent found himself momentarily sprawled on the chilly flagstone floor, taking a moment to catch his breath amidst the eerie quiet that enveloped him. He could still hear the rain pounding against the front steps through a narrow gap in the towering door, and felt grateful for having secured shelter for his horse. As he rose in the dim light, he took in his surroundings. He stood in an impressive reception area where a sweeping staircase curved gracefully on either side. Suits of armor stood guard at various points throughout the space. Just ahead of him loomed a pair of intricately carved double doors. The silence within this grand abode was profound, so quiet that one might have heard a pin drop. Yet a gentle glow filtered through the cracks of those doors ahead. After making a few tentative attempts to call out to anyone who might be inside, he finally mustered his courage and approached the softly lit room, slowly pushing the doors open wider. Stepping over the threshold, Laurent surveyed the inviting space before him. A warm fire crackled merrily in an expansive hearth, while a table set for one offered a modest selection of dishes alongside a carafe and a large glass waiting patiently. His gaze wandered around this cozy sanctuary, taking note of plush chairs and tables scattered with books that beckoned for attention. Yet, there was no sign of the homeowner. Laurent awkwardly settled into one of the armchairs, waiting for a moment. The tempting aroma of the meal spread before him proved too alluring to resist, and he found himself captivated by the loaf of bread and the savory scent of roasted meat. As time ticked by without any indication of company, his stomach grumbled loudly, urging him to give in to his hunger. He took a seat at the table, starting with a slice of bread, and gradually savoring every bite of the entire meal at a leisurely pace. An hour drifted by in peaceful silence, and he assumed that the owner was away, seeking shelter from the storm elsewhere. Enjoying a satisfying sip from his glass, he eagerly polished off the rest of his dinner. Convinced that the homeowner was absent, Laurent reassured himself that he could explain his presence come morning. After finishing all the food, he reclined contentedly in his chair, emptying the carafe. The crackling fire cast a comforting warmth around him as he drained the last drop from his glass and pulled out the letter regarding his recovered cargo ship from his pocket. Once filled with hope, his dreams now felt distant and faded. Without realizing it, he pushed the letter aside on the table and surrendered to a deep slumber. Throughout the night, he slept soundly without dreaming. When morning arrived, it took him a moment to gather his thoughts and remember where he was. The fire had long since died down, and remnants of last night's meal lingered on the table. It appeared that the homeowner had still not returned. Feeling a wave of embarrassment for having intruded into someone else's home, discomfort washed over him. Rather than wait for the owner to return, Laurent decided it best to leave quietly and quickly, justifying to himself that the untouched dinner would have gone to waste anyway. He rose from his chair, crossed the room, and opened the double doors. Soft light filtered into the entryway, illuminating the stark hallway more clearly than it had under cover of night. Stepping cautiously into the foyer, he felt as if he were treading on eggshells amid watchful suits of armor. Half expecting them to spring to life and bar his path, he gazed at the grand twin staircases adorned with their faded, ornate carpet runners, but couldn't shake off an unsettling feeling that this place had been uninhabited for quite some time. As he approached the grand front door, he grasped the handles tightly, summoning all his strength to pull it open slowly. Beyond lay a mist-laden courtyard. After slipping through the threshold and securing the door behind him, he straightened his waistcoat, striving to regain his composure. Though he felt a twinge of unease about leaving the imposing mansion under the cover of darkness, like a thief, he resolved to put this embarrassing moment behind him. He quickly made his way back to the alcove where his horse had been tied the night before, feeling a wave of relief wash over him when he found her safe and sound. From his saddlebag, he retrieved an apple, a leftover from Camille's thoughtful provisions, and offered it to the grateful mare. After untying her, he led her quietly along the stone path he had navigated through the stormy night prior. As he glanced back, the mansion loomed large in the softening light of dawn. The vast chateau stretched long and rectangular, with a central section flanked by matching wings on either side. Its tall, narrow windows lined both imposing floors in a disciplined array, seemingly gazing down at him with an air of authority. The thick chimneys and sloping tiled roof only added to its grandeur. Shifting his attention away from the formidable structure, he guided the horse towards the front gate, taking in the wild gardens that flanked either side. As he neared the end of the path, a charmingly untamed pergola caught his eye, draped with rose bushes. At its heart stood a rose bush, adorned with some of the most exquisite pink blossoms he had ever encountered. Remembering his promise to Camille, his youngest daughter, he resolved to keep his word. With a knife from his bag in hand, he eagerly began snipping off the delicate roses from their boughs, determined to gather them all as a token of his commitment. So engrossed in his task was he that he failed to notice footsteps approaching until it was too late. Stepping back from the now bare bush, an unsettling feeling crept over him as if someone were watching. When he turned around, he found himself face to face with a stern figure. Although resembling a man, this being was marked by an unruly mane of facial hair and an unusually tall, muscular build. Caught off guard and appearing disheveled in hastily thrown-on linen shirt and breeches, this rugged individual looked ready to unleash his fury. "What do you think you are doing?" he growled, sounding much like a wolf. Laurent stood still, acutely aware of the bouquet he clutched in his left hand. He stumbled through an explanation, insisting he believed the house was empty and that the roses would go unnoticed. Noticing no shift in the man's fearsome demeanor, he weakly added that he had promised roses to his daughter. The man in the linen shirt, with a fierce presence, remained silent for a moment, seemingly weighing his next words. Standing tall, he proclaimed, "You have taken advantage of my hospitality without consent. You dined and rested here, something I was willing to overlook. However, by plucking every bloom from my beloved rosebush, you have crossed a line. Each of those flowers holds immense personal value to me. They cannot be replaced. You must find a way to repay this loss." Hearing this made Laurent's heart sink. He shook his head in defeat, confessing that he had nothing to offer as payment. The stern host regarded him with cold eyes. "In that case, you must work off your debt," he declared firmly. "I need laborers at my estate." Laurent stared at him, desperately trying to propose another solution. "But sir," he protested, "I have 6 children waiting for me at home. I cannot remain here. What will happen to them?" The man showed no signs of compassion. "You will either work off your debt, or someone from your family must take your place," he insisted. "Take your roses. They hold no value for me now. Return to your family and make arrangements. I expect either you or a substitute within a week. If you fail to comply, there will be consequences." With that final statement, the stern man turned away without looking back. Laurent watched him disappear into the chateau and realized he had no choice but to return home and prepare his children for his absence. Perhaps once the man calmed down, he might release Laurent from his obligation. Riding steadily yet slowly, he contemplated how to share this troubling news with his family. Despite the beautiful day, the mist lifting and the sun shining brightly, his heart felt heavy with apprehension about what lay ahead. He arrived home late that night to find his children eagerly awaiting him. After all, they were excited for gifts. As he opened and closed his saddlebags, they playfully reached in search of the treasures he had promised them. With regret filling him, he instead handed each child a rose. Camille took hers and inhaled its sweet scent with delight, marveling at its beauty. Yet his other 5 children clamored for their real presents. And now that evening, gathered around the bustling kitchen table, Laurent shared the tale of his ill-fated expedition to the port city with his children. He recounted not only the loss of his dwindling fortune, but also the series of events that led him to owe a debt to the enigmatic owner of the distant chateau. As he revealed that he would need to return and work off what he owed, his 5 oldest children reacted with discontent. They frowned and questioned how they would manage without him by their side. Camille, however, remained quiet. Sitting at the table with a contemplative look on her face, she seemed lost in her thoughts. After a moment, she called for silence, surprising her siblings. Camille was rarely one to voice her opinions. She declared that she would take her father's place at the chateau. Laurent's eyes brimmed with tears as he protested vehemently against such an idea, insisting he could not let her do this. Yet Camille's logical reasoning was hard to refute. Their father needed to stay home to support the family. She, on the other hand, could be spared from those duties. Moreover, she possessed some skills in managing a household and could handle any cleaning or cooking tasks assigned to her. In the end, she concluded that there was no other reasonable solution. She was determined to be the one who would work off their family's debt. It took Camille a day or two to gather her few belongings for the journey ahead. As the rose her father had given her began to fade, she pressed it between the pages of a book for safekeeping. It served as a reminder of why she was leaving everything familiar behind to serve a beastly stranger at an isolated estate. Though anxious about departing from all she had ever known, Camille was resolute in her desire to make her father proud. The morning of Camille's departure broke bright and clear. Together with Laurent, they loaded her belongings into a small cart hitched to their loyal mare. The chateau lay 2 days' journey away, with the horse pulling their cart, and Laurent knew of an inn where they could rest for the night along their path. Her 4 remaining siblings gathered outside their cottage to bid them farewell. Their faces reflected a blend of relief and unspoken admiration. They were grateful that they wouldn't have to fend for themselves for too long. The journey was somber for both Laurent and Camille. The first day brought lovely weather, and their night spent at an inn passed without incident. On the second day of their journey, the weather turned blustery and somber, heralding autumn's arrival in the forest. Brown leaves, the first to fall with the changing season, danced across their path, while the wind whistled a haunting tune through the trees. Their loyal mare trotted steadily along the road, drawing them closer to an inevitable parting. As Laurent spotted the turnoff from the main road that led to the chateau, a heaviness settled in his heart with every step they took. Sensing her father's sorrow, Camille mustered her courage and offered him a warm smile. "Don't worry, father," she said softly. "I am strong. I will be fine." He nodded, hoping her confidence would ring true. At last, they arrived at the dreary entrance of the estate. Laurent understood that their moment had come. Once again, he pushed open the gate, leading their horse through and approaching the imposing mansion for a second time. Camille stared in awe at what lay before her. The intricate, overgrown gardens and towering walls of the house were unlike anything she had ever encountered. It was both overwhelming and striking in its stark beauty. Coming from a humble village background, Camille found herself speechless at the sheer scale of it all. feeling as if she were standing before a great mystery that had long been forgotten. The stones appeared to slumber deeply, as if waiting patiently for someone to uncover their secrets once more. She contemplated the tasks that awaited her within those walls, hoping they would be within her reach. Bringing the horse and cart to a stop at the wide front steps, Laurent braced himself against the gusty wind that seemed intent on pushing them away from this imposing entrance. Together, they climbed slowly up the steps. Laurent raised the heavy door knocker and let it fall with a resounding thud. Father and daughter stood there on those steps, anticipating the arrival of the stern master of this grand house. To their surprise, when the door creaked open, it revealed not an imposing figure, but rather a boy who appeared to be around 13 years old. Dressed simply in village clothes, he peered out at them with curiosity before nodding in approval. "Are one of you here as the new servant?" he asked. Laurent was caught off guard momentarily, but explained that he had brought his daughter Camille to work off his debt in his stead. The boy nodded knowingly, as if this were entirely expected, and opened the door wider, inviting her inside. With that, the voice scurried away into the depths of the house, likely to inform everyone that the new servant had arrived. With the wind at her back, Camille stepped through the doorway and into her new existence. The farewell was a poignant moment for both Laurent and Camille, yet they each wore a brave facade. The loyal mare turned towards home, the heavy clouds pressing down upon them, and didn't glance back until they reached the chateau gates. At that point, the swaying trees of the forest closed in behind them. Camille stood hesitantly in the echoing hallway. The muted light of the cloudy day filtered through tall windows above the door, but it did little to instill a sense of warmth. She stifled a shiver and edged closer to the trunk containing her possessions. Steeling herself, she resolved to summon her courage and give it her all. A few moments later, a boy came dashing back into the hall and informed her that the Baron had instructed him to escort her to her room. With that, he cheerfully lifted her trunk and began hauling it up the sweeping staircase. Camille followed him, surprised to find they were ascending, rather than descending, toward a kitchen or lower chamber. Perhaps she would be staying in an attic room. To her astonishment, the boy turned down the first grand corridor as they walked along the richly carpeted east wing of the chateau. Their quiet footsteps echoed past portraits of noble figures from long ago, as if these painted ancestors were permanent residents observing an unexpected guest. So captivated was Camille by their gazes that she nearly bumped into the boy when he abruptly halted in front of a door and pushed it open. Stepping inside after him, Camille was taken aback to find herself in one of the most beautifully appointed bedrooms she had ever seen. It wasn't overly spacious, and its furnishings were modest, yet the canopied bed, exquisite fabrics, and elegant wood trim exuded luxury. As she took in her surroundings, spotting a cozy window seat and a small dressing table, the boy announced his intention to start a fire in the grate. Once it crackled warmly to life, he dusted off his hands with a grin aimed at her. "I'm Gabriel," he said cheerfully. "I assist the Baron with various tasks around here. I'm really glad you've arrived. It can get quite lonely sometimes. and I could use some help with daily chores." Unsure how to reply, Camille wondered what those daily tasks might entail, but simply thanked him for lighting the fire and asked when she might meet her new employer. Gabriel gently informed her that the Baron had expressed his intention to meet her the following day, when he would clarify her responsibilities. For the moment, the boy would be bringing her a modest supper, hoping she would find restful peace through the night. Then, just as quickly as he had entered, Gabriel slipped out of the room, closing the door softly behind him. Camille took a moment to gather herself before beginning to unpack her belongings. She hung her clothes neatly in the spacious wardrobe and placed her few cherished books carefully on a side table beside the bed. As she opened one of the volumes, she discovered a delicate pink rose tucked between its pages, which brought forth a bitter-sweet smile. After closing the book and setting it aside, she wandered over to the window, drew back the heavy drapes, and nestled into the plush cushions of the window seat. From this vantage point, she enjoyed a sweeping view of the courtyard below, where gardens grew wild along winding pathways and up the chateau's stone walls. Dusk was settling in. A gentle wind swept across the paved yard, stirring up small whirlwinds of leaves and twigs. Dark clouds raced past as the moon began to rise. Weary from her journey and feeling somewhat disoriented in her new surroundings, she found herself drifting off to sleep amidst the soft embrace of the curtains. A gentle knock on her door stirred her awake. Rousing from her slumber in the window seat, she took a moment to steady her breathing before opening the door to discover a tray waiting outside, laden with a simple meal of bread, cheese, soup, and steaming tea. The hallway was empty. It was clear that Gabriel had moved quietly away. She brought the tray inside and set it down on a small table near the fireplace. Hungry from her travels, she savored every bite. Skipping any elaborate bedtime rituals, she pulled back the coverlet and slipped into the cozy warmth of her sheets and pillow before quickly surrendering to sleep. That night, Camille found herself immersed in strange dreams. She envisioned wandering through dimly lit corridors of the chateau while following a large dog that would dart into different rooms, only to reappear moments later in the hallway. Eager to catch up with it, she reached a doorway just as it vanished from sight. Peering inside, she didn't find a dog, but rather saw a man seated at a desk with his back turned toward her. Just as he began to turn around in his chair to face her, she jolted awake. Sitting upright in bed, she noticed how low the fire had burned and felt warm sunlight streaming through her window. As her initial bewilderment faded away, a gentle knock echoed at her door. Standing there was Gabriel, balancing a tray in his hands. "Good morning, Miss Mill," he said with a polite smile. "I've brought you some breakfast." He gestured vaguely toward the entrance and added, "The Baron would like to see you in his study once you've finished." Camille nodded at the young boy, accepted the tray with gratitude, and watched as he quietly slipped away. An hour later, Camille found herself standing anxiously at the door of the very room where her father had once enjoyed a secret dinner by the fire. She could hear the rustle of papers from within. Taking a deep breath, She cleared her throat and tapped softly on the door. The sounds ceased, and she heard a chair being pushed back across the floor. Moments later, a man with an impressive amount of facial hair emerged. His features were rather exaggerated, and his expression seemed to carry a perpetual frown. Though he was quite an intimidating figure, Camille made sure to mask her apprehension. She dipped her head in a courteous greeting. The large man scrutinized her for a moment before nodding his head awkwardly in response. He then gestured for her to take a seat in a chair near the fire. With that, he settled himself into the armchair opposite her. Understand that you are the one tasked with repaying your father's debt, he said. Are you comfortable with basic household chores like cleaning and cooking? Camille nodded, confirming her skills. The man's expression brightened at her response. He picked up a hefty ring of keys from a nearby table. As you can see, I am quite short on assistance here, he continued. Gabriel tends to my essential needs. His mother provides me with bread, milk, and eggs daily, and he runs errands in town. But aside from myself, there's no one else to oversee the estate. You can surely tell that just by looking around. It's still quite a lot of work for just you and Gabriel, but we shall manage. He paused, as if anticipating her reaction. Camille felt overwhelmed at the thought of being the sole housekeeper in such a vast mansion, yet she sensed there was no point in voicing her concerns. The man went on. These keys will unlock most of the rooms in the house, although many of them may not be necessary for your tasks. If there's anything you require that Gabriel cannot fetch for you, please don't hesitate to ask me. Otherwise, I prefer that you make as many decisions regarding the household as you see fit. I tend to spend most of my time in my study or the library. Feeling daunted by the magnitude of responsibility he was placing upon her, Camille could only nod, signaling that their conversation had concluded. He stood up abruptly. She rose from her seat, accepted the ancient-looking keys from him, and nodded once more. As she turned to leave the room, he called after her, "Dinner is at 7 p.m. It would be wise for you to join me in the dining room." Camille bobbed her head in acknowledgement, thanked him softly, and exited the study. Standing momentarily bewildered in the echoing front hall, she felt both lost within its vastness and as though it were closing in around her. With the heavy keys resting across her open palm, she contemplated their significance. She was uncertain about which doors they might unlock, but sensed they carried an aura of quiet authority. Her thoughts were interrupted by Gabriel stepping out from the shadows. With a bright grin directed at her, he asked if she would like a tour. Feeling grateful for his offer, she eagerly accepted. Thus began her adventure as the housekeeper of the chateau. What Camille discovered was that the employer lived in solitude, a circumstance he had maintained for many years, largely due to his formidable appearance, which instilled fear in the locals. They whispered unkind tales and treated him with disdain whenever he ventured into public. The only link he had to the outside world was Gabriel. Years ago, Gabriel had begun running errands for the Baron, but over time he had come to cherish and respect the man hidden behind the stern exterior. He reassured Camille that the Baron's growl was far more intimidating than his actual nature. Each day, Gabriel dedicated himself to tending to the Baron's needs within the house, returning at night to his modest family home on the outskirts of town. Indeed, Miss, he affirmed earnestly, the Baron possesses a heart full of kindness and fairness. Gabriel then guided Camille through the vast array of rooms and corridors within the chateau, much of which bore the marks of neglect. In the shadowy hallways lay unused bedrooms cloaked in dust covers. The once warm fireplaces stood cold, with some chambers having remained untouched for decades or even centuries. Furniture and belongings were piled high in those forgotten spaces, draped in cobwebs. The windows struggled to allow light to filter through due to layers of grime that had settled on the glass over time. As Camille ventured through the estate, she discovered that only a handful of rooms were regularly used, and it was her task to clean and organize them. Among these were the kitchen, the Baron's study, and the grand entryway. Yet the most breathtaking space of all was the library. Gabrielle kindly permitted Camille to sneak a glimpse into this enchanting room while the Baron was otherwise occupied, and she was utterly captivated by what lay before her. The library was an expansive chamber with soaring ceilings adorned with golden accents. Towering bookcases reached up to the very top of the walls, leaving only the windows unobstructed. At each end of the room stood rolling ladders, ready to glide along the shelves and offer access to any book within reach. The collection seemed endless, with spines and hues of crimson, deep green, navy blue, and rich brown, all inviting her to explore their contents. Having been an avid reader of the few books available during her father's financial struggles, Camille had never encountered such a magnificent assortment. Gabriel mentioned that the Baron often spent hours here, and it certainly appeared so. Tables scattered throughout this luxurious haven were stacked high with books opened to various pages or neatly arranged in groups, while well-worn leather armchairs whispered tales of countless hours spent absorbed in their hefty volumes. Gabriel gravely informed her that it was his duty to keep the fire crackling in the grate throughout the day. Camille imagined how delightful it would be to open one of those many tomes and settle into a cozy chair, breathing in the aroma of aged paper filled with ink. It was simply magical. She understood then that if she wanted to make progress in this neglected home, she would need to pick a spot and begin. On her first day, she and Gabriel dusted off and aired out the front hall before turning their attention to tidying up the kitchen. For some time now, Gabriel and the Baron had been preparing simple meals there, but much of the space needed care. While Camille wasn't an expert in cooking, she found joy in bringing back the kitchen's luster. She sent Gabriel into town with a shopping list and then set about her work in the grand yet silent kitchen. Countertops that had gathered dust were cleared away, pots and pans were polished until they gleamed, and slowly but surely, the once cold and empty space began to feel alive again. By the time dinner rolled around with the Baron, Camille had prepared a modest meal of roasted chicken. It may not have been extravagant, but she felt a sense of pride in her creation. With little time to prepare, Camille returned to her room. Gabriel had rekindled the fire, and she quickly used her pitcher and washstand to refresh herself before slipping into her finest dress. As she approached the window to close the curtains for the night, she paused to gaze out into the enveloping darkness. The courtyard was still, as if holding its breath in anticipation. Not a single creature stirred. Even the birds were silent. The grounds seemed wrapped in a tranquil hush. With a gentle tug, she drew the velvet curtains together and reluctantly turned away from the window. There was so much yet to explore in this enchanting place, she thought. Lighting a candle, she ventured down the dimly lit hallway and descended the grand staircase. She paused before the tall dining room doors. The room was remarkably opulent for just 2 guests. It must have hosted lavish gatherings and splendid formal dinners in times past. She looked up in awe at the sparkling crystal chandelier that hung above like a celestial canopy. At one end of the long table, Gabriel had set 2 places, and dinner awaited her arrival. She was the first to enter. It wasn't long before she heard footsteps. The Baron's imposing figure appeared awkwardly in the doorway, pausing to nod at her in acknowledgement. He gestured toward the 2 place settings, inviting her to take a seat. Camille settled into one of the plush chairs with delight. "I see you and Gabriel have been quite busy today," remarked the Baron, raising his eyebrows at the hearty meal laid out before them. "He has shouldered a heavy burden as my sole assistant these past years. I'm glad you'll be here to help lighten his load." Camille nodded, unsure how to respond. "You are my lord," she began hesitantly, but he shook his head gently. "Please, call me Antoine," he replied with a hint of humor in his voice. "I am lord of nothing now, just this chateau and its collection of dusty relics," he added with a wry smile. Looking deeply into her eyes, he said, "I regret the circumstances that have led you here, but I sincerely hope you find solace. I aim to be just, and it brings me joy to have your company." Camille nodded gently and offered a brief smile. "Would you like me to tidy up the library tomorrow?" she asked. "I wasn't certain if you wanted me to go in there." After a moment's reflection, the Baron agreed with a nod that it would be fine. He added, "Please feel free to borrow any book that catches your interest from the library. As Descartes once said, reading good books is like engaging in conversation with the greatest minds of history. You'll find my library boasts an impressive array of volumes. It's quite enchanting in that way." Surprised by his kind gesture and cultured manner, Camille observed her somewhat melancholic employer as he dined. Though she had only been at the chateau for a day, her outlook on her situation was already beginning to transform. She now found herself as the mistress of a grand estate, free to work at her own pace, and she had just been granted access to a vast library. Perhaps this unexpected turn of events wouldn't be as dismal as she had initially feared. Lost in thought while contemplating her meal in the flickering glow of the firelight, she heard nothing but the soft clinking of silverware against china. During dinner, the Baron and Camille exchanged few words, finishing their meal in respectful silence. Later, as she lay cozily tucked beneath the crisp white sheets of her opulent canopy bed, Camille felt a sense of hopefulness. This secluded estate held many captivating secrets, and she looked forward eagerly to discovering them in time. Rolling onto her side, she sleepily admired the tightly drawn drapes that blocked out the darkness beyond the window. Inside the chateau, a flame flickered warmly, filling her with comfort. The next day, after tidying up the kitchen, Camille made her way cautiously to the library. Knowing that the Baron was occupied in his study provided her with an opportunity to explore the magnificent collection of books under the pretense of cleaning. With a duster in hand, she carefully navigated around the shelves and tables, attending to surfaces that had long been neglected by dust. Just as she was about to move a stack of books, Antoine appeared in the doorway. "Kindly avoid disturbing any of the stacks or opening any books," he gently requested. Camille, feeling a bit sheepish, took a step back from the pile she had inadvertently touched. "There's no need to say sorry," he reassured her with a warm smile. "I realize it may appear a bit chaotic. I'm in the midst of some research and would hate to lose my spot." He then asked her if she had chosen a book for herself. She admitted that she hadn't, and sought any recommendations he might offer. Camille shared her feelings of inadequacy when it came to understanding such profound literature, as she felt her education was not on par with his. Antoine smiled warmly, gesturing expansively as he said, "Acknowledging one's ignorance is the first step toward wisdom." Noticing her confusion, he playfully winked and added that this wisdom was attributed to Socrates. He crossed the room and carefully retrieved a small book from a lower shelf, presenting it to her with care. Perhaps you would enjoy some of his other thoughts. He firmly believed in the importance of asking questions. Camille accepted the book with a grateful nod. Just as she was about to leave the room, she paused and indicated that she did have a question after all. "Is it possible for me to hire some villagers to help tidy the gardens before winter?" she asked. Antoine looked at her with a hint of sadness and shrugged. "If Gabriel can find anyone willing to come onto the estate, you are free to do so. Sadly, most are reluctant to enter the Sato grounds due to the wild stories that have circulated about me over the years, which has left me rather isolated." Camille frowned at this revelation. "How do you cope with it? Doesn't it anger you to be treated so unfairly?" The Baron lowered his gaze thoughtfully before responding. "I once was a more attractive yet vain and foolish man. It took a significant misfortune for me to recognize my errors and understand how people view me. Perhaps this is simply retribution for my past foolishness." Camille fell silent, choosing not to ask any further questions that day, but feeling determined to learn more about how her employer had found himself in such unfortunate circumstances. For now, she looked forward to exploring Socrates' writings in her room after dinner. As time passed, Camille quickly adapted to her new role as housekeeper of the chateau, and even grew fond of it. With some persuasion, she convinced Gabriel to employ a few local men who arrived one day and cleared away years of neglect from the gardens. This task was undertaken only after Camille had given them strict instructions not to disturb the rose bush near the pergola, which had been planted by Antoine's mother and held deep sentimental value for him. She nearly regretted inviting the village men into the house when she caught their unkind remarks about Antoine. "He's a total monster," one man declared loudly to his companion. "He lives like an animal in there," chimed in another, "with no manners and not suitable for human company. But I'll gladly take his money," he finished crudely. Camille noticed Antoine standing by the window, absorbing every word. In a rush, she hurried to close it, desperate to protect him from the men's harshness. He waved her off dismissively, appearing unaffected. "I'm used to this sort of talk," he said calmly. "It's been many years since I've been able to mingle with society." Camille felt a surge of frustration as she asked, "How can you stand such injustice? They don't even know you. How do you not despise them?" He shrugged, his gaze drifting to a stack of books on a nearby table. A brilliant English playwright named William Shakespeare once wrote, "There's no furnace so hot for your enemy that it doesn't burn yourself if you bear goodwill for those ignorant souls. By easing their burden, I lighten my own." With a gentle smile and a nod toward Camille, he suggested, "You might enjoy reading Shakespeare yourself. His plays are quite remarkable." Then he returned to his books, leaving Camille to reflect on his words and the gloomy day outside. Even with the overwhelming chores that awaited her each day, Camille still found moments to explore the house. As autumn settled in with its crisp air, early dusks, and chilly nights, she would meander through the corridors with a flickering candle in hand, using her hefty ring of keys to unlock the numerous closed doors that lined the halls. Most of these rooms turned out to be bedrooms, revealing that this chateau had once welcomed many esteemed guests from nobility. Covered in dust sheets, one shadowy room after another unveiled elegant four-poster beds, exquisite furnishings, and chairs draped in fabric long untouched by time. One afternoon, she stumbled upon what appeared to be a particularly special room. It was unmistakably a lady's chamber, unlike any other, and still brimming with her possessions. A delicate dressing table showcased jars of powder and sparkling perfume bottles glinting in the afternoon light. Nearby stood elaborate wigs from days gone by, perched on their stands as if waiting for an extravagant ball to begin. As Camille opened the wardrobe, she was taken aback by the sight of a collection of exquisite silk dresses from the pre-revolution era. She delicately traced her fingers along their fragile skirts, almost afraid they might crumble at her touch. Imagining the elegant lady who once adorned these garments, the room seemed to shimmer with echoes of the past. When she turned to the chest of drawers, she found it brimming with sparkling necklaces. Nestled within a small velvet box lay a ring set with a glimmering sapphire. Camille closed the container gently, careful not to give the impression that she was pilfering treasures. With a tinge of regret, she left the room and secured it once more. It felt like a portal to happier days, and was undoubtedly the most enchanting sight she had encountered in the house. Camille devoted herself to writing letters to her father, which Gabriel would take into town during his errands. In these letters, she reassured him of her well-being and her enjoyment of work. Eventually, she even began sending him some money. After her first month, the Baron informed her that he could no longer permit her to work without compensation, since she had more than compensated for the damage done to the rosebush. He expressed his hope that she would remain and offered her a weekly salary for her contributions, which Camille gladly accepted. As Antoine's housekeeper, she felt as if she had discovered her true purpose. Her organizational talents flourished, and the delightful company and access to his remarkable library became her greatest sources of joy. Although Antoine was often deemed unattractive, little about him had changed, except that Camille took great care in ensuring his clothes were tidy and presentable. Occasionally, while passing by or during their conversations, she would catch a glimpse of what appeared to be a handsome man in the mirror. In those moments, he seemed less rugged and more harmonious in his features. Yet after blinking and refocusing her gaze, she would find herself staring at the same fearsome visage as before. It felt as though the dark enchantment of the chateau was playing tricks on her senses. With a hint of irony, she observed that sometimes a beggar would appear at their door, blissfully unaware of the estate's infamous reputation in her village. Typically shunned and rarely offered help, beggars were often turned away by townspeople who believed that those in hardship somehow deserved their fate. They thought that diligent individuals wouldn't find themselves in such desperate situations. Camille had expected Antoine to send them away, but to her astonishment, he asked her to give him the lovely coins before they left. Intrigued, Camille wondered about his unexpected generosity, especially since no one around him had shown him any kindness. Once again, he referred to a philosopher he admired, Aristotle, saying, "A truly noble person seeks no favor, but is always ready to extend kindness to others." He sadly acknowledged, "I must strive to become a more noble man, because it was my own actions that led me astray." Despite her curiosity, Camille couldn't pry any further details from him at that moment. Yet she yearned to understand Antoine's story more deeply. Later that evening, as they shared a warm winter stew in the softly lit dining room filled with flickering candlelight, Camille found the courage to ask about Antoine's solitude at the chateau. After a brief pause and a deep sigh, Antoine leaned back in his chair, took a sip of his drink, and began to share his tale. "Years ago," he began, "I lived here with my mother. After my father passed away when I was just a child, I inherited the lordship of this estate. I adored my mother, a beautiful soul who spread joy and kindness wherever she went. She was the one who cared for the rose bush that your father stripped of its blooms." Antoine hesitated for a moment, visibly pained by the memory, before continuing. "When my mother fell ill and eventually died, I found myself alone and unprepared for what lay ahead. Unfortunately, I did not rise to the occasion. Young and foolish, I wasted our family's fortune on lavish luxuries and extravagant celebrations. I neglected the estate, ignored our debts, and treated my staff poorly. Without my mother's wise guidance, I descended into a life of excess that held no worth for anyone, myself included. One evening, during one such extravagant party, my servant came to inform me that a woman was at our door seeking food and help. Caught up in the merriment of the night, I heartlessly dismissed her request and told my servant to send her away to find work elsewhere. But before he could usher her out, she pushed her way inside and foretold that my arrogance would lead to my ruin. She cursed me with a life of loneliness and lovelessness until I learned to embrace compassion and seek redemption. With a furrowed brow, Camille pondered Antoine's words. Humanity? What could she have meant by that? Antoine let out a sigh, his shoulders shrugging in resignation. That is the riddle that has haunted me for years. Despite having access to an extensive library brimming with the insights of philosophers, mathematicians, and poets, I find myself ensnared in my own curse. My mind expands, yet the collective wisdom of humanity has not revealed a way to set me free. Camille studied him from across the table, listening to the gentle crackle of the fire that punctuated their quietude. She envisioned him sitting alone by many flickering flames over the years, without anyone to share his thoughts. How long had he been confined in this solitary prison, leafing through endless tomes in search of redemption? Antoine flashed a bright smile, trying to dispel the uncomfortable silence. "Ah well," he remarked, as the brilliant Isaac Newton once said, "To arrive at the simplest truth requires years of contemplation. Perhaps one day I shall uncover the answer while she rests on her bed that night." In that moment, Camille felt as if she was piecing together a puzzle. All those years, Antoine had dedicated himself to studying, reflecting, absorbing knowledge, and seeking atonement. He was no longer a man who would deny kindness even to those deemed unworthy. Yet she couldn't help but wonder what else lay within him. Would he remain forever confined to this sanctuary of books and dusty relics of his former self? She fervently hoped not. She had come to admire him deeply. Tucking the covers snugly beneath her chin, she gazed sleepily at the glowing embers in the hearth. Wrapped in the comforting silence of their home, she drifted off into a slumber once again. Throughout the biting chill of winter, Camille and Antoine shared their days at the chateau alongside Gabriel, who served as their loyal link to the outside world. Many rooms in the grand mansion remained locked and untouched. The spaces that they frequented were warm and tidy, thanks to Camille's diligent care. Their meals were simple yet nourishing. Outside, snow blanketed the courtyard like a dazzling white quilt, while gusts of wind occasionally whistled through deserted corridors. Yet within those walls, the inhabitants found solace by the firesides, immersed in their beloved books. At long last, the first whispers of spring graced the land. Camille received a letter from her father, sharing the joyful news that her eldest sister had found a suitor, and their wedding was to be held in just a few weeks. He kindly inquired if the Baron might permit her to take some time off to join in the celebrations at home. If granted leave, Laurent would be more than happy to come and escort her from the estate. When Camille brought this request to Antoine, he set down his book. looked at her with a gentle smile tinged with sadness, and replied, "Of course, she must go, and she should take all the time she needs." As gratitude filled her heart for his understanding, she once again saw not the beast she had once feared, but a man before her. She blinked several times, as if to clear away an enchanting dream. As she stepped out of the room, she paused momentarily and cast one last glance back at him over her shoulder. Then she left him to his reading, tucking that moment away in her mind. Her journey to and from her sister's wedding was uneventful. Upon her return, family members greeted her with curiosity and perhaps a newfound admiration. They admired the elegant new attire she had purchased with her earnings. It was evident that the money she had been sending home had played a significant role in securing her sister's marriage. Though modest in nature, this match elevated their family's standing. They were no longer viewed by the villagers as destitute. Instead, they were seen as stable and respectable, thanks to Camille's consistent support. Yet, despite these changes, Camille felt less at home in the family cottage than before. Though she had been confined within the chateau's walls all this time, it seemed as though her perspective had shifted dramatically. Her horizons had broadened significantly. As she sat around the fire with her siblings discussing their trivial concerns, a sense of suffocation enveloped her. She felt a pang of sadness at having to part from her father once more, but also experienced relief when he bid her farewell at Antoine's estate gates. She was eager to return to her role as mistress of the house. However, joy quickly turned to dismay upon witnessing the chaos that awaited her upon arrival. Gabriel answered the door with enthusiasm, clearly thrilled by her return. He leaned in close and whispered that nothing had been quite right since she'd laughed last. He mentioned that the Baron had become disheveled and rarely left his library. After tidying up her belongings, Camille made her way directly to see Antoine. As she gently pushed open the door to the library, a chaotic scene greeted her. The room was in utter disarray. Books were scattered about, many left open in haphazard piles, while empty glasses cluttered the tables. Antoine was slouched in a chair, appearing as though he hadn't changed his shirt in days. At the sound of her entrance, he lifted his gaze, revealing a look of sheepish relief. In that moment, Camille found herself seeing him not as a distinguished baron, but as an ordinary man, and she struggled to reconcile this image. Logically, she recognized that before her stood someone unkempt and unshaven, almost beastly in appearance. Yet her eyes seemed to deceive her for a moment longer. Finally, she could see him clearly once more. Indeed, he looked like someone who desperately needed cheering up. It took Camille only a few days to restore order to the chaos. The dust and neglect accumulated over weeks were swiftly managed, and upon her return, the Baron's spirits lifted immediately. However, Gabriel confided in her that he wished she would leave again. He explained that the Baron had plunged into a deep melancholy and had become utterly incapable of managing anything at all, even forgetting to take his meals. Yet with spring bursting forth across the estate, it was hard to remain sad for long. Camille felt a wave of happiness wash over her, knowing she had successfully organized the garden's cleanup before winter arrived. The courtyard now sparkled with beauty, showcasing the lovely plants that Antoine's mother had lovingly arranged many years ago. Flowers of every hue blossomed gracefully, enhancing the charm of their surroundings. Each day seemed to bring more birds, whose sweet melodies filled the mornings and beckoned the chateau's inhabitants to enjoy the garden's splendor. Camille and Antoine began to savor their afternoons beneath the pergola, often allowing Gabriel to wrap up his chores early so they could unwind together. Camille delighted in flinging open the mansion's windows, inviting fresh breezes to sweep through the once stuffy rooms. Life across the estate felt revitalized, as if a new chapter was unfolding. As summer drew near, Camille received a letter from her father announcing her sister's upcoming wedding. She found herself caught in a tug-of-war between her duty to attend this family celebration and her desire not to part from Antoine again. To navigate this predicament, she proposed an unusual idea. He would join her at the wedding and stay at a nearby inn. Antoine was taken aback by her suggestion, voicing his worries about how others would view him. Camille comforted him by explaining that her village was distant and that its residents wouldn't have any preconceived notions about him. She no longer perceived him as a monster, but rather as the wise and gentle man she had come to cherish. In her heart, she believed her community would welcome him with open arms. The thought of a nobleman attending a village wedding didn't daunt Camille at all. She had long since stopped viewing Antoine as a beast or a baron. Though hesitant at first, Antoine eventually consented to accompany Camille to the wedding, wishing not to deprive her of celebrating her sister's special day. He wore an anxious expression during the preparations, appearing somewhat somber about the whole affair. Undeterred by his mood, Camille arranged for Gabriel to visit a local tailor and have a new suit crafted for Antoine, a well-fitted ensemble that would replace his outdated attire from years gone by. She recognized that current fashion favored cleaner lines and simpler designs, and she wanted Antoine to don something dignified that would present him in a more modern light, rather than as an echo from another time. The rooms they had occupied were neatly arranged, and the carriage sparkled with a fresh polish. At last the day came when Gabriel waved goodbye to the couple as they embarked on their journey. It was a sight he had never witnessed before, the Baron departing from the estate. He reassured them that he would keep everything in order while they were away. The carriage ride to Camille's village was swift, taking just a single day under the splendid summer sky. The season was alive with vibrant colors as their horse trotted along the forest path. Sunlight streamed joyously through the leafy canopy above, casting warm beams onto the road ahead and whispering sweetly in the gentle breeze. At first, Antoine remained quiet, seemingly reluctant to be seen alongside Camille in public. Yet after a few miles, he began to discuss a book that Camille had been reading, and soon their familiar, playful banter returned. Camille couldn't help but smile to herself as she watched his best traits shine through. From her vantage point beside him, she felt as if she were sitting next to a charming gentleman, delighting in that thought without wanting to break the spell. Eventually, their delightful journey drew to a close. As twilight descended, crickets began their evening serenade in the fields around them. Antoine and Camille reached her family's cottage and halted the carriage before stepping down from their seats. There stood her entire family at the door, her 4 unmarried siblings eyeing them both with mischievous glances. Laurent took a moment to gather himself before stepping forward to greet Antoine warmly, thanking him for accompanying Camille and honoring them with his presence. However, Camille felt her cheeks heat with embarrassment when Laurent leaned in to whisper something teasingly to her older sister, prompting giggles from the girl. It was clear that jokes about the Baron were being exchanged among them all. A sense of relief washed over everyone when Antoine finally took his leave for his lodgings. Once inside, Camille allowed herself to be swept into conversation with Laurent and her siblings as they chatted about wedding preparations. Yet amidst their laughter and chatter, she couldn't shake off her concern for Antoine and hoped he was being treated well at the inn. As she nestled into bed that night, thoughts of him lingered heavily on her mind, like a gentle lullaby waiting to soothe her into sleep. She understood that once the wedding was over and they returned to the chateau, a sense of relief would wash over her, for she now regarded it as her true home. The atmosphere was heavy when he arrived at the church the next day for the ceremony. Camille's anxieties had indeed come to fruition. They sat in quietude throughout the service, both acutely aware of the weighty stares from those around them. The small church felt even more confined with the entire congregation observing their every move. After the ceremony, the celebration unfolded on the village green. It was a modest yet vibrant gathering, filled with punch, cakes, and wild flowers. In this cheerful setting, ladies formed small groups, delicately enjoying their treats, while children danced across the lawn, delighting in an afternoon of carefree play. Yet Camille and Antoine felt a profound disconnection from the joyful atmosphere. She stood stiffly beside him, acknowledging the villagers who had once extended their warmth to her. Those friendly faces that had taught her about gardening and baking years ago now kept their distance, murmuring among themselves and casting knowing looks in her direction. Not a single neighbor offered a kind word to Antoine, who maintained a polite smile but chose silence instead. Her own family provided no solace either, completely disregarding the couple as if they were invisible. As Camille and Antoine stood there, fervently wishing for the party to come to an end, they caught snippets of a conversation between 2 men nearby. "You might have wealth," one of them sneered, "but he'll never convince anyone to marry him with a face like that." The other man laughed, replying, "It's quite pitiful when you have to woo your own maid." Those words were the last straw for Camille. Setting her punch aside, she made her way to the center of the gathering and firmly declared that she had something important to say, demanding everyone's attention. "I persuaded the Baron to join me because I believed you all were good people," she announced. "I was certain that his noble spirit and kindness would show you that he is not the monster you think he is. However, I must admit, I was wrong. None of you deserve his respect." We will trouble you no more. Let me be clear. Antoine is a better man than any of you. I would choose him as my companion over each and every one of you 100 times over, and that is the truth. An astonished silence enveloped the room as everyone turned their gaze from Camille to Antoine and back again. When she looked at him again, she noticed something extraordinary. In place of the figure she had known, a strikingly handsome and dignified man now smiled gratefully in her direction. Despite her efforts to refocus her vision and clear her thoughts, his features remained unchanged. The once excessive facial hair, the sharply defined features, and his imposing stature seemed to have vanished. He appeared as charming as any man she had ever met, and that was undeniable. Whether it was a shift in perception or some kind of magic at play, the other guests continued their festivities as if nothing had happened. They welcomed Antoine warmly and smiled at Camille as if everything was perfectly ordinary. It was as though the embarrassing incident had never occurred. The villagers behaved as if they had never encountered a beast among them before. It was both a mystery and a miracle. A lasting veil had been lifted, heralding Antoine's long-awaited liberation from the enchantment that had bound him. For many years, he had sought knowledge in the depths of his library, immersing himself in the wisdom of humanity. Yet, he had misjudged the woman who had cast the curse upon him. The solitary decades spent growing kinder, more generous and forgiving had nurtured within him the humanity that ultimately won Camille's heart. This newfound essence was the key that shattered his curse. Soon after, Camille and Antoine found themselves together beneath the pergola in his garden, admiring his mother's rose bush, which was once again flourishing with vibrant blooms. As twilight settled over the chateau and crickets began their gentle serenade, the joyous couple reveled in the warmth of a summer evening. Camille gazed at Antoine, now transformed before her eyes, appreciating the handsome visage that had long been hidden beneath a beastly exterior. As she watched him, he straightened up and pulled from his pocket the ring she had admired in his mother's dresser. "You were the only one who truly made an effort to understand me," he said earnestly. Then, with a playful smile, he quoted one of his many beloved books. As Copernicus said, everything revolves around the sun. You have become my sun. With a wink, he added, "In truth, I believe you are more than capable of managing this chateau." Camille laughed softly and nodded in agreement as he slipped the sparkling blue gem onto her finger. As she marveled at its beauty, memories flooded back of when she first discovered it, in that enigmatic bedroom among elegant dresses and sparkling jewels. It had glimmered in the sunlight like it held a precious secret. Now, she felt herself becoming part of this estate's rich tapestry. Before summer faded away, Antoine and Camille exchanged their vows in the chateau's courtyard, enveloped by the sweet fragrance of blooming roses and the melodic songs of birds perched high above them. Standing under the shadow of their home, Camille looked at Antoine with a heart brimming with gratitude. She felt an undeniable sense of belonging in a place that once felt so foreign to her. This was no longer the desolate estate she had encountered just a year prior. Through kindness, patience, and a quest for understanding, they had unearthed their own happiness together.